Okay, welcome back everyone. Today I am going to talk to you about the best practices in programming. So when you're first starting out, it's a lot to kind of learn and absorb at once. And sometimes if you have been at it for a while, you will start taking shortcuts because you get a little lazy. But we want to either give you direction if you're just getting started or make sure you're keeping up good habits if you are a more veteran programmer. So what I'm going to do today is I'm using the COVID-19 vaccine example from the pseudocode lesson, and I'm going to actually go through and write the code for this and walk you through some of the best programming practices. I have the super basic account on YouTube, so it will cut me off after 10 minutes. There might be a part 2, hopefully not a part 3, but I do have a lot to say about best practices, so we'll see what happens. Now, to refresh your memory, this may look a little different than the pseudocode example because I didn't save my work, so I had to write it all over again, but it is theoretically the same thing. So you have to create an online calculator for a black market company that sells COVID-19 vaccines. Your very sketchy client needs you to, first of all, ask the user how many vaccines they want. Then it needs to calculate the subtotal, so just the number of vaccines times the price, and show that to the user as well. It should also calculate the tax and show it to the user. It needs to show the user the flat shipping fee, and last but not least, it needs to calculate the grand total, which is just the subtotal, the tax, and the shipping, and show that to the user as well. So your output down here should look something like this. We need to know how many vaccines the user wants. The user will enter that number there. Then the computer will spit all of this out based on the user's input. That's shipping. Shipping is $45 no matter what. So to solve this problem, we need to know that we're charging $500 per vaccine. This is black market, doesn't come cheap. However, despite being illegal, we're still collecting 15% tax, and the shipping is $45 every time. So I have pretty much done my pseudocode down here already. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it, but it does lead me to my first point of best practices in programming, which is choosing descriptive variable names. So if you're just starting out, you might not really know what examples of good variable names are, or if you're more of a veteran, you might just get lazy and be like, I know what my code does. But descriptive variable names are so important. So for example, we need to get the number of vaccines that the user wants, right? I could just call it something nondescript like X or var1, but that doesn't tell me what that variable's function is and how it's going to be used further in the code, right? When you say something like numvax, that's a little more intuitive that it's the number of vaccines, right? Especially if you're brand new to coding or you need to make your program reproducible, so like someone can see it on GitHub and know what you're talking about. By saying numvax instead of X or var, you're reducing the cognitive load of that person who's trying to understand your code. So it's very important. I can do a thing about variable names that are legal and illegal as far as like what Python will allow you to do and not do, but that would not be for this part of the video. All right, so now that I've got that diatribe out of the way, I am going to talk about like piecing it out. So let's pretend that this program takes me about 20 lines of code to write. What I don't want to do is just type my little life away, do lines number 1 through 20, and then run it to test for bugs. Bad way to do it, because if you have a bug in line 3, it's going to be really hard to figure that out once you're all the way down at line 20. As well, if you go from like start all the way to the end, you could have multiple errors and you might get overwhelmed and be like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. So honestly, 2 or 3 lines at a time, run it, see what happens. If a line is something easy, like just assigning a variable, you don't have to really test that every time, but I'm going to show you what I mean because I have started to code down here. All right, I want to make sure you can still see the example output. Okay. So first thing I need to do is get the number of vaccines that the user wants. So that is what I'm doing here. This line is a little complicated. I haven't talked to you about the raw input function yet. You probably know a little bit about the int function, but don't worry about this syntax too much. What I am going to do is I'm going to say, me, Krista, I haven't used the raw input function in a while. Let me make sure I've written this correctly and that the syntax is right. So even though I've only written one line, I'm going to run it to make sure I've written it right. So press F5, and look, I have an error. Raw input is not defined. That's Python telling me, hey, you think raw input is a thing, but I don't know what the heck you're talking about. So since I have staged this ahead of time, I'm going to go, oh, you know what? You're right, Python. I'm confusing this with a different language. It's not raw input. It's just plain input. So now I'm going to run it again, make sure it works. Beautiful. That's what I want. So now I'm going to put in a number, press enter. Okay. That means there were no errors. It's at the end of the program because our program's only one line. Good deal. All right. So what's next? Define a variable to hold the price and call it price. Okay. I am going to do this variable in all caps. When you define a variable in all caps, it is sometimes thought of as a global variable. Granted, I was taught this in my Python class and then I never heard anyone use that term again. But a global variable, in theory, is something that doesn't change and is outside of any loops or outside functions, but we're not there yet. So the way you can denote a global variable that doesn't change is by putting it in all caps. So since our price, we're not expecting it to change, I'm going to put it in all caps, and the price is $500. Note that I'm not putting a dollar sign here because Python will interpret that differently than us humans will. We just want this to act as an integer, so I am just putting in a number. Now, we need to calculate the subtotal by multiplying the number of vaccines by the price. And then we want to assign this number to a variable, and we want to call that variable subtotal. Okay, subtotal equals num underscore vax times price. Okay. Now, I just said that we put this variable in caps because we don't expect it to change. So one thing you might be tempted to do is instead of writing price, you might want to just write 500. This is a no-no for reproducibility, because if you had to use that number over and over in your code, you'd be writing 500, 500, 500 over and over again. Then if someone else needed to use the code, or something unexpected happened and we did in fact have to change this price, you'd have to go back and fix every instance of 500 and you would likely miss some. So when you write a number literally into your code, we call that hard coding, and you do not want to do that. The opposite of hard coding is relative coding. So by putting it in the variable name, we are doing something better, because down the road, if we do have to change this to say 100, all we have to do is change this 5 to a 1 and the rest of our program will be just fine. So given that I had problems with this before, I'm going to run it. Oh wait, no, I'm not, sorry. Now the other thing about using the Python idle is that it won't show you variables unless you explicitly tell it to display them. So before I run it, I'm going to tell it to print the subtotal to make sure it's calculating and running the way that I want it to. So now we run it. Okay, I'm going to say I want 2 vaccines, so then subtotal should come out to be 1,000. Perfect. Okay, good. So this was a sanity check, right? This is making sure that everything is running the way that you want it to. And a sanity check is just anything you can write to make sure that the operation you wanted was performed correctly. So I don't actually need that. That was